Cool. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm Megan Linebarger. I work for a boutique PR agency called Zazil Media Group, and I've been involved with PRSA Tri-State for a couple years now, so I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. And I will let you guys introduce yourselves, so let's get to it.
Great. Testing the mic now.
Yes.
Sam Stark, EVP Endeavor Global Marketing. So we're the cultural marketing agency that sits within Endeavor, which is basically entertainment conglomerate. We own IMG, UFC, New York Fashion Week.
Thank you. I'm Lucy Caldwell. I'm the founder of a seed-stage startup called Mockingbird Lab. It's an audience intelligence platform. I'm actually currently on leave from that because I'm running the campaign of a person who is primarying Donald Trump. So that's why I look so tired. But it's great to be back with feeling more like I'm with my crowd. For the last 5 years, I was the chief strategy officer of a company called Crowd Scout, a startup I helped found that was an audience engagement platform for campaigns, nonprofits, advocacy groups. We sold earlier this year to an entity associated with the Bloomberg philanthropic world. And before that, I came up in comms and PR, but really primarily completely focused on issue advocacy. And so I come at this from kind of maybe the other side of the coin, but really happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Krista Conti. I'm an SVP and head of digital commerce for Hotwire. We're a global communications agency and really with the goal of helping our customers, whether they're brands, businesses, to better engage with their audience and ultimately the customers.
Greg Gallant. I guess I got the mic to Oh, it just wasn't on. Hey, this working? Great. I'm Greg Gallant, the co-founder and CEO of Muckrack, which is a software platform that helps PR teams, both in-house at companies and PR agencies, contact journalists, find the right journalists, monitor the news and build reports, and also the Shorty Awards, which is the largest award for progressive social media. And then we also have a spin-off show called the Shorty Social Good Awards that honor brands for the best social good work that they do.
Thanks, guys. So as you can all see, we have a very well-represented panel right here. Everybody very qualified for this topic. So I just want to kind of start with the title, the crux of it. Using PR and digital strategies to drive social change in the era of fast activism. Fast activism, I think, for me that was a new term, and I would love to hear you guys just tell me a little bit about what that means to you, and how that relates to the work you do, as well as how this has impacted the way brands are communicating with their audiences. So.
Great. So fast activism is really something that's come to the forefront over just the last 5 years, and I think that technology has enabled a voice to people in a different way, and brands have no choice but to listen. Where we are right now, and I'm very much focused in on brands, and we represent big brands, so Marriott, Visa, Under Armour, we're very much in the lifestyle and entertainment space. And so because people have a voice on Twitter, TikTok, and other ways that they didn't have before, there's much more pressure on brands to listen to what their target consumers really care about. And I think with fast activism in and of itself and what it means, that it's very easy to get that voice out there. It takes just a retweet, it takes just a click, it just takes you a couple seconds for you to be able to talk about what you care about. And even beyond that, there's a social equity to it now. Like, people expect you to stand for something in your social circles, particularly younger audiences. I spoke to about 100 interns at Endeavor about 2 months ago or so, and 90% of their questions were about what brands were really doing in this space and purpose, and honestly, did they believe in it? Because they questioned whether or not they believed in what they're doing. And so I think fast activism is critical, and in the past, purpose was at the center of corporate communications campaigns. That is no longer the case. Purpose is now at the center of what you do from a brand, lifestyle, marketing perspective. That means the talent that you work with, that means what you're doing on your social, and it can be something fun, and it can be something meaningful, and it better be something that you actually institute inside of your company at the same time, because it has to be real.
So I would say that for me, when I think about fast activism, what I'm fundamentally talking about is thinking about how in any given issue campaign or in the life cycle of an issue. You know, when people talk about customer journeys or a marketing funnel, right? They're often talking about selling a product or a service, but the customer journey of someone who's engaging with an issue and deciding to take up that cause or you know, call their lawmaker, give money to the cause, let people in their community know about it, in and of itself is a funnel in and of itself. So when I think about fast activism, I'm thinking about the way that funnel has really been shifted. And I'm thinking a lot about how it reflects a big change in who the stakeholders are. So in the old model, I live in Washington and I work with lots of campaigns and nonprofit, lucky me, trade associations. And in the old model, it was kind of like, you know, a few people made a decision about a cause in truly like a thank you for smoking, smoke-filled back room. And then the idea was that they sent out, you know, the NFIB or a large advocacy org, they sent out kind of directives to their regional directors who then passed it down to the grass tops and hoped that they sent emails or got people to do what the people in that smoke-filled room, felt was the right thing. And that has been completely turned on its head. I mean, if you look at decision makers today, whether it's lawmakers or even as frequently, if not more, you know, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, even just small business owners, people are very motivated and brands are very motivated by wanting to be responsive to what consumers want. And consumers overwhelmingly say that what they want is to vote with their shopping carts and in their consumer choices every day and engage with brands that both are delivering positive services or products, but also are making, you know, a positive social impact. That's far and away their biggest priority beyond companies creating jobs, which in and of itself is a cause. So when I think about fast activism, I'm really thinking about how the rise of technology, how the rise of interconnectivity, there's certainly so much ugly stuff that we see in terms of how technology interacts with our democratic process. But when I think about fast activism, I'm thinking about kind of the just really unbelievable and unprecedented opportunities it gives everyday people to engage with causes and make the brands they engage with responsive. And when you think about just some of the causes that have sort of taken on big lives in the last few years, you think about a cause like Me Too, which is a cause that has impacted many of us very personally, right, in a positive way. That's because of the accessibility of fast activism, of someone to find communities online, amplify their message, you know, with a tweet. So that was probably a little long, but that's fundamentally what I'm thinking about.
Krista, I want you to share the statistics that you had mentioned before. I mean, just talking about how many consumers really care about purpose-driven brands.
Yeah, I'm going to come at it from a different perspective also because I work with more B2B companies. And it's a little bit of reverse, right? Because we're not necessarily working with brands that are directly impacting, you know, the consumers, impacting us on a day-to-day. But at the same time, as marketers, we're also buying from other businesses. So we are putting them under a lens of, do they align with the values that we hold true? So from our research, we did a report called High Stakes Leadership in a Post-B2B World. And we looked at, we surveyed 6,000 decision makers across, and marketing decision makers across 8 countries. And the post-B2B world is essentially looking at the fact that whether you're B2C, B2B, B2P, B2H, I mean, there's so many, you know, pick your alphabet soup, but essentially we're all human in how we approach things and how we want to be not even sold to, but how we want to be spoken to. So there really is this, you know, need to follow on of wanting these companies to not just say that they're going to make the change, but to actually make change and to stand for something that they believe in.
I think fast activism, it's hard to, I think all the definitions here are great in both that element to where consumers and everyday people can kind of jump on these movements and make things happen. Also examples like we heard earlier from Mallory from Small Girls where actually companies can jump on these issues really quick as they see it. And I think what's kind of fascinating now is if you think back, probably just 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, it was kind of unconscionable that a major brand would take a stand on a social issue because their calculus was, we want to sell to 100% of consumers. So if we even piss off 10% of people because we take a stand on this controversial issue, now we've decreased our market size. And now it's kind of impossible to imagine a brand manager thinking that way, because brands all the time are now getting called on to take stands on things they never thought to take stands on before. And even in the last week, I think most marketers weren't thinking about what's our stand on human rights in Hong Kong. And now all of a sudden we've seen probably a dozen brands thrown in to have to answer that exact question. And it's I think, kind of an unprecedented thing for brands now to have to figure out, how do we address this? How do we take stands on all these? And in a way, they almost need geopolitical experts and ethicists and a whole bunch of skill sets that they've never had to deal with before to react to what's going on in the market.
Yeah. I would actually add to that. I mean, because I'm consumer brand marketing, and that's the shift I've seen within this last year. We are always pushing that purpose needs to be at the center, and it needs to be very authentic to what you do. So, Dick's Sporting Goods is one of our clients. So the stance that they took on guns makes a whole lot of sense for them. Did that help their bottom line? No, they took a loss. But was it the right thing to do? Yes, it was the right thing to do. And they take it even further beyond that, and across the board with our clients, they're all looking to us to strategically tell them what is the stand that they need to take, and how does that authentically connect to who they are as a company. Because in the past, that wasn't at the center of their marketing. Those causes are now at the center of their marketing. So even Dick's Sporting Goods, one of their biggest initiatives, and something that they should be very proud of and that we help them with, is a program which is called Sports Matter. And then that started in 2014. They've donated over $110 million towards youth sports programs in high schools, where people, like particularly at-risk youth, wouldn't have access to sports. And just in like 2019 alone, $20 million, because this is a real issue. It's an issue that connects to their business, and that is at the center of how they're marketing, whereas in the past, you would have seen lighter things at the center of how they're marketing themselves.
So these are incredible points, and I have an interesting segue for you guys. So Lucy, you had mentioned it's creating these opportunities, and I think one of them is something that Mallory really pointed out extremely well, is new business opportunities. So for example, like Billy and ThreadUp, where there's an opportunity to address a social issue, but then we're getting into brands that don't have necessarily, it's a traditional legacy brand. Dick's has been around for, forever in my mind. When you're working with clients who don't necessarily have that, this is our purpose, how do you address that, when you're working with clients? And, maybe they don't even have a budget where they can create that, incredible program. How are you working with clients to find what is it that speaks to you, and how can you draw that back to your consumers and, communicate that to them?
So I can start. As part of the research, we did find that it was nearly 80% of decision makers were worried that a high stakes issue, and high stakes being climate change, Me Too, gender equality, would impact their business, but only less than half actually had a plan to be able to react to it. So that is one of the first things that we're doing, is saying, okay, what what are the potential challenges? What are the scenarios where we would want to react, and being able to prepare for it, but also thinking about those challenges and those risks as opportunities, and really making sure that you're aligning your brand with a purpose because of this need and desire and craving, basically, for whether it's consumers or your audience to have a value-based, basically a prophecy.
I can take from a strategic planning standpoint. The process varies company to company, but I think the most important thing is understanding your target audience and what they truly care about, because Most companies are in a situation where they have causes that they're already aligned with, and sometimes there's too many causes to make a real impact, and that is a frequent, particularly if you're looking at big consumer brands. And so where you need to stop and step back is really do deep audience research. Take a look at your preferred audience and what are those causes that they care about. That's number one. What do they really care about, and what do they want to see that's different? Number two, you're going to step in and say, okay, that's what they care about, but what is actually authentic to where we can make a difference as a business? So going back to Dick's Sporting Goods, they can make a difference as a business because they sold guns in their stores. So to remove the guns from their stores, that will make an actual impact in what happens in that area. You know, if you look at Coca-Cola, who's not a client of mine, water should be important to them, and water is a big initiative to them because the product that they make affects water. So it's the same sort of thing. It's like, what does your audience care about? What do your employees care about? And then what can you actually make a difference for with the product that you manufacture? Otherwise, it's not real, it's not authentic, and authenticity is everything because you can't just say you're gonna do something, you better do something to back it up too.
There was an interesting term used earlier called good washing, and that's kind of common, and that was the first time that I had heard it applied with the term good washing. So what do your guys' take on that? And have you seen any bad examples? I'm sure we could all think of a couple. I know they had mentioned the Pepsi commercial earlier today, and a couple others, but from your experience, or not necessarily direct experience, but what have you observed, and what are some lessons to take away from that?
Well, I think that part of what that gets at, why do some of those things backfire in such unprecedented ways? And one of the reasons is that I think a lot of us came up in an era where we were really, really excited about audience segmentation, and we used to talk about, and split testing and micro-targeting and delivering different messages to different audiences depending on what resonated with them. And that's a very effective way to reach people initially, and is of course important to segment your audience, but it can also cause brands and organizations generally to go down a path where the kind of gut check of authenticity is lost, because you're talking to part of your audience one way and part the other way. And this is, in the nonprofit world, kind of an age-old problem in a landscape like this, because maybe you have supporters who are volunteers and activists who feel really strongly that they hate the current administration, and then you have like high dollar donors who love the administration. There are lots of examples like this, or a corporate sponsor who hasn't divested from some country that has horrible working conditions, whatever. And so I think that in a lot of these kinds of dumpster fire situations, what we see is are brands that are really trying to have it be both ways and be all things to all people. And so, for instance, the Gillette toxic masculinity campaign was amazing, and I loved it, but they did not have their house in order at the time. And as soon as that happened, they were getting slammed for the pink tax on so many of their products. And when you think about kind of how underprepared, you're talking about big legacy brands, they were for that backlash, when you think, well, you maybe could have flagged that. And then it really comes down to authenticity. And I want to sort of add the caveat that I don't think it's a matter of companies or brands being perfect. I was on a panel a few weeks ago where someone brought up the example of Everlane deciding to kind of move to more sustainable packaging in their shipments and deliveries, and people called them out at some point and were like, well, we're still getting all this plastic or whatever. And they said, look, this is hard, and it's hard for us to do this, and we're doing our best, and we're failing, but we're trying, right? And they're, of course, a much more a younger and more dynamic brand than, say, a Gillette. But I think that when consumers say that what they want is for brands to have a social good component of their companies, what they're saying in part is that they expect honesty and authenticity.
I think there's something to be said for being able to say, like, we fucked up. Like, I'm sorry, but we tried this one way because we thought that this was, what you wanted as a community. I recently, there was an example from Target where they launched in New York with a sort of local community vibe, and they turned like the storefront area, sort of a street of New York with bodegas, and they redid like CBGBs to be like a Target branded, and it really impacted the local community, and they were almost offended by what Target did to try to like assimilate to the community and not actually understand it. And they actually said that we were trying too hard to be the community and not learn from the community. And I think that's where data and understanding, going back to the start and maybe doing focus groups or just really looking at your audience and being able to analyze those numbers is critical.
I just want to add to the Gillette point too, because I think where it's different with what Gillette did, the pink washing point is a really important one, because that's actually something that all brands do. It's not something that just Gillette does. You pay more for a female product than for a male product across the board. So it's actually a societal issue, but Gillette got blamed for it. So I think it's very important that we keep in mind, like a marketer needs to keep in mind that things that seem like they are normal now, you may actually get blamed for as a brand, even if you're not the only one doing it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think so much of this also shows where it can't just come from the marketing department, because a lot of these ideas with taking on issues, I think a few years ago, it's like the only issue you'd take on would be something kind of doesn't have any controversy to it, so maybe making a donation to an orphanage or an opera or something like that. And yeah, sure, the marketing department can do that, or the CSR department can do that. There'll be no backlash, no scrutiny. But now to take a societal issue, if it's just the marketing department doing that or just an agency saying they'll do that, but it doesn't align to how the actual company operates, how the CEO thinks, where the board of directors at, kind of the institutional workings of the company, then at some point people scratch and dig. And journalists, as anyone here who's been in media relations knows, they love to find hypocrisy and to dig and find those stories. So the second you put yourself out there as a beacon, the more scrutiny you're going to have everywhere else in the business.
Something that just kind of occurred to me, and I would love to hear your thoughts, but do you think there's anything to be said about maybe legacy brands where, and thinking of older white men sitting around the decision room table where, to them, these marketing decisions, it's just simply marketing, and they're not thinking about walking the walk, because many, many years ago, there was no repercussion. There was nobody, digging deep and trying to look behind the curtain. So that's really changed. And I think you had mentioned social media, and I know Brandy said this earlier too, that has really made a huge impact on it, and it's given people insight into how they're actually operating.
Definitely, and I don't think that there's really anyone in the C-suite that doesn't realize the importance of this at this point in time, and I think that they're looking to their marketing partners. I love it. Several CMOs that I know now have innovation in their title, so it shows you that marketing has shifted a little bit to become much more about actual product innovation and just marketing in and of itself. But I'll give a good example of what I think is a case study. So CVS is someone who came to us back in 2018, and their remit was a marketing remit. They said to us, okay, tell us how we can differentiate our beauty aisle. Like, how can we make our beauty aisle seem different from others? And so instead of coming back to them, because if you look at Duane Reade, they're selling the same products, right? And so in 2018, the idea that we came back to them was, well, you know what? There's a real issue around how females feel about themselves related to how people are touching up imagery in the beauty aisle. There is statistics out there that show you that self-esteem of young females goes down like 30-40% after seeing one of these beauty ads. And so our idea to them, based upon that insight, is and there's mental health issues and everything else that comes along with that are serious issues, right? Our answer to them was like, well, you know what? Why don't you be the first? Why don't you be a cultural leader to get out there and say, you know what? We're going to label every single photograph that goes into the beauty aisle in CVS as being doctored. And so it's going to be a CVS beauty mark that you will see whenever anyone has sort of changed that photography. And that was a cultural moment. They did something real, so it got massive press across the board, of course. But then in addition to that, within that first year, 70% of the brands that sold within CVS actually put that beauty mark, and actually 70% of them came back with undoctored photos. So it made a huge, huge difference.
That's amazing. Wow.
They found more beautiful mugs.
Yeah. That's very, very cool. I love to see like there was an actual change from it too, which was really cool. Awesome. Well, so that was something that we had also talked about is that now as brands, when you're taking on whatever purpose, you're holding accountability for that purpose. What are your thoughts on that? You know, how do you advise your clients to stay on that track and just continue to walk the walk on it? Like, it can't just be a one and done sort of thing.
I think it's a process. It's not gonna, and no one's sort of expecting someone to change overnight, to wake up the next morning and be like, I want to do something about climate change, and all of a sudden like make drastic improvements. But it does start with that plan, right? And making sure that you have a purpose that one is authentic, and that you can get behind and create a full plan behind, because saying again is not the same as doing. And I think you can take steps, and you can, I think the most important is to coach your leadership around it. Our CEO likes to talk about male, pale, and stale, and the fact that there's a lot of leadership, that is kind of set in its ways and isn't adjusting to what societal norms are. So being able to look around a room and say, maybe I should get some opinions of people that don't look like me, is a good start to that. And whether that, you set into play maybe it's a small increase in the percentage of females on panels. Sorry, Greg, but it's taking those steps and then being able to articulate that, tell that to your audiences that you are making that change and you're showing it and doing it, and continuing to keep that going forward.
I think that a lot of this has to do with how brands and organizations talk to their audience when, like on an ongoing basis, that their audience feels like they're playing the long game with them. Like this is not a one-off where, once the press coverage comes and goes, or once if you're operating in an advocacy scenario, once kind of they get the outcome that they want legislatively, whatever the case may be, that they're still there for them, and that they're talking to their audience in the language of that audience's communities about things that they care about, this seems obvious, but about how what they're doing impacts their daily life and how it makes the lives of their children better, and that it's not simply we did this one thing one time last year and now we're back to, business as usual. I think a lot of that on the technology side can come with brands being willing to use technology like phone to action, which is an example of a technology that Patagonia, has made the centerpiece of its work on barriers and other environmental causes, and essentially empowering their audience, who they're really at the end of the day selling apparel to, but they're really selling a lifestyle of environmental and social advocacy, and they're saying, you are our partners in this and we're doing this together. So can you contact a member of Congress, or can you, take this stand with us and add your name? And so I think that, you see even some companies beginning to deploy peer-to-peer texting, or other types of technology like Voter Circle, the kinds of technology where you're, asking people to then become the envoy of your cause to people that they know. And I could go on. I won't go down the rabbit hole of talking about first party versus third party data, but I think that a genuine commitment to a reciprocal relationship with the audience is, I think, really key for companies that are successful in this way, when it comes down to kind of like the practical, everyday nuts and bolts of implementing this kind of change.
I think so much of it too comes down to training your own team, employees. There was that case from a while ago where some Starbucks baristas were kind of racially profiling who could get into the bathroom. And there it just goes where Starbucks is such a progressive company headquartered in Seattle. but that doesn't matter. It's the action of a few baristas, and I forget what city that was in, but anywhere in the world.
Philly, I think. Yeah, I think it was Philly, right?
Sounds right. Yeah. So any of your thousands or tens of thousands of employees can affect your reputation now more than before. I think if that happened years ago, maybe a local newspaper would have reported on it. The chance of that getting picked up nationally would have been slim, but due to social media, just anyone wearing your logo, and maybe it's even a firm you contract to operate one of your stores, can reflect your brand. So a lot of it now comes from not just how do you have a great idea in the headquarters, but how do you get a global workforce that shares your values and operates in the right manner.
And also to that point, in that example, that's a great example because in the old paradigm of maybe a local paper writes about how awful this interaction was. Okay, so maybe that gets published. Maybe it even gets published that afternoon online, but maybe it's published the next day. And then, of course, your sort of like intrepid comms team is monitoring any media about you. And so in that paradigm, you have time to really get ahead of it in a way that brands now don't, as you say, right? It could be that it's erupted in a matter of a few hours, right? And your whole team is sort of caught not knowing what the hell to do. And so, but that just gets back to, I think, the need to be authentic and be able to say, this is terrible, or, in a way that is believable, right? That you, if you can sort of show, like, we've shown we have this commitment to these values, and so you can believe us that this was a one-off, not like we're sort of sweeping under the rug this more systemic, persistent problem.
I would just add to that, I think we're at a time when people are consolidating how they're approaching this. So there should be no confusion about what the values of your company is. You should be like representing that value in a day in and day out manner within your employee communications, within what you're actually doing day in and day out. Tomorrow, our entire company is volunteering. No one works tomorrow. We all know that that's important, and we all know what pillars we're volunteering against. And so similarly, it's not just internal communications, then externally, the work that you're doing. So it's a 360 approach, because we live in a marketing time right now, and what we like to say is that you used to be able to kind of get people to engage with you. Now you have to be something that people cannot ignore, because time and attention is extremely fragmented. One of my favorite statistics recently is I saw this really great sketch that showed that the average consumer lives a 31-hour day, and the reason that they do that is because they're doing two things at once. So you've got this screen here, and you've got the screen behind you. So if you think that you have their full attention, you absolutely do not have their full attention. Therefore, you need to be hitting them on every channel with succinct messages that actually matter to them, connect to culture, because otherwise they will ignore you. 77% of brands will disappear and no one would notice, and that's kind of frightening.
That is frightening. That's an incredible statistic. I think a lot of what you guys are all saying too, though, is that it's a lot of this starts internally, and maybe just from the very get-go, it starts internally, and making sure you have a team of people who are all on the same page with getting the same consistent messaging, and putting that out on behalf of your brand. The Starbucks, that was an amazing example, and then they shut everything down and did training, correct? So, they implemented that really quickly, and I think showing that they're walking the walk is vastly important, especially for a brand like that to, not be then just getting boycotted and, do brand boycotts work? I don't know, but I think maybe we are getting closer to a place in time where they could really start impacting a brand.
I did see a statistic recently that 29% of people said that they had boycotted a brand, and which is much higher from what I think we would have seen 5-10 years ago. I think we're at a point where, and I mentioned this at the intro, because social clout is now related to what you represent. We are all now brands, whether we like it or not, online and offline.
You don't want to associate with the brand.
You do not want to associate with that brand, so you will have a real boycott on your hands.
Yeah. You don't have to say what brands, but have any of you ever boycotted a brand? I know I have. I won't say which ones exactly, but I've definitely partaken in that activity.
probably avoided
Yes.
based on
Yes,
a
avoid.
knowledge. Yeah, but it's a big point that nobody is immune in today's world. It's, there are constantly things happening that whether you're representing yourself, whether you're representing a company, your client, the partners that you work with and the companies that you work with, if they make a questionable move, you have to evaluate your partnerships, right? Your suppliers, you're constantly in this circle of, are the people that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis aligning with the values of my organization? And if they're not, then you have to make some strong decisions or have some strong conversations with people, because it does impact, your brand in the long run.
Also, that there's so much choice now. In a way, the word boycott for a category where there's a lot of choice, the word doesn't almost make sense, because you need a
Have other
backpack.
options, yeah.
There's now 50 brands of backpacks you could buy in a 1 mile walk of here. So if you choose Patagonia because you believe in their values and it's going to have the Patagonia label, I mean, are you boycotting the other 49? It doesn't matter, but in essence, it's the same thing.
Exactly, and that's also it too. If there are so many choices, for me, if there's 10 choices, I might do the research to find out which one aligns the best with my values. So I think in that sense, maybe they don't feel that, negative impact of a boycott, but at least internally, you're making a purchasing decision based on what you align with. So it's pretty fascinating and something that brands need to take into consideration. So we probably have 5 minutes left. So if we were to leave everybody here with one key takeaway, whether that's, a serious tip that you follow day in and day out, or a tool that you can't live without, I would love for each of you to share that with the crowd if you have something offhand that you can share.
Absolutely. And I realize I also forgot to give my Twitter. So I'll give my Twitter.
Yeah.
It's at Sammy Stark, SAMMY Stark. But the one takeaway that I would offer to everyone, and something that I'm seeing day in and day out working with some of the most iconic brands in the world, is that we are at a fundamental shift where purpose is at the center of all of your marketing, not just your corporate social responsibility, but also your lifestyle, your consumer. All of it needs to map back in some sort of way to purpose. And if we think that it matters now, it's going to matter 10 times more in 5 years.
I think that my one sort of takeaway and caveat as people go out on their merry ways to put purpose at the center of their marketing campaigns for the brands they're working with is to remember that, for instance, people in this room were probably much more likely to be savvy about boycotting brands, because these are the kinds of issues that we think about all the time. I mean, you're all here at this panel. And similarly, we live in major cities, right? And so those kinds of aspects of the vacuum, I think, are part of why when your brand or organization decides to take on a cause, it's also important, I think, to make sure that the language that you're using and that the causes that you're taking on, that you've done a gut check to think, is this a cause that resonates with my audience who doesn't, shop in the same places I shop, who doesn't go to the same restaurants, who isn't in my neighborhood, right? Am I reaching the communities of people who don't look like me? And if you're not, but you think that the cause is really important, then think about what about the language you're using is failing to communicate that that value. I think we've seen this a lot with issues around, for instance, around trans rights, right? For people who don't live in major cities, David Frum recently pointed out that I think a few years ago, like the number of times that transgender was mentioned in the New York Times was like 1/20th of the time that, or was 20 times the number that opioids were, right? So if you're a person who's living in Ohio or, rural Vermont, and your community is being ravaged by the opioid crisis, and a brand of people in LA or New York are telling you that what you really need to be focused on is this thing that is very unfamiliar to you, you may accidentally turn someone off to a cause that is really important. So thinking about what kinds of language you can use, and I'm sorry to end on such a heavy note, but thinking about what kinds of language we can use to talk to people who don't think exactly the way we do, that is, I think, one of the best ways that your brand can be a steward of the causes that you care about?
I think leaving everyone here with just the fact that the world that we live in is a crazy and unpredictable place, and being as prepared as we possibly can is going to set yourselves, set your companies, set your leadership up for success. We've seen some amazing CEOs crumble under one, negative news line and one, potentially damaging issue. So being prepared, making sure that you're not only prepared from a statement perspective, but from that mission and passion perspective, so that it's not just a matter of getting likes, it's a matter of making sure these things happen to impact your bottom line and the customers that you're dealing with every day.
And I think on a similar note, make sure that you really gather everybody at your company or your client, not just in marketing, but the CEO, the board, other departments, and make sure you really articulate what your values are and where you want your company to take stands, where you're going to, what your system's going to be, take a stand on an issue should it come up, because so often now companies are asked a question of them that they've never been asked before, and the answer needs to come from more than just a calm spin. It's an actual statement that that company's making and a real lasting decision they have to make.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everyone, for being such great attendees. And yeah, get ready for the next panel. Thanks, everyone.